It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when the news broke. A robbery had occurred at Chief Adeoye's mansion, and valuable items worth millions of naira had been stolen. The police swiftly launched an investigation, and within hours they knocked on Kayode's door. Kayode was a bright, ambitious teenager, known for his sharp mind and kind heart. His father, Mr. Bayo, a respected teacher, had always instilled in him the values of honesty and integrity. But now, as he stood in his small, modest home, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The walls of their living room, adorned with family photos and a few worn-out books, seemed to close in on him. The faint smell of jollof rice wafted in from the kitchen, a reminder of the comfort of home that felt so distant now. The knock on the door was firm and authoritative. Kayode's heart raced as he exchanged worried glances with his father, who had just come in from the backyard, wiping his hands on a rag. "Who could that be?" Mr. Bayo asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "I don't know, Dad. Maybe it's just a neighbor," Kayode replied, though he felt a knot tightening in his stomach. "Let me check," Mr. Bayo said, moving towards the door. Kayode followed closely behind, his mind racing with possibilities. When Mr. Bayo opened the door, 2 police officers stood there, their expressions serious. The taller one, a stout man with a stern face, spoke first. "Good afternoon, sir. We need to speak with your son, Kayode." "Is there a problem, officer?" Mr. Bayo asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. "We have reason to believe that Kayode may be involved in a robbery that occurred earlier today," the officer replied, his tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. Kayode felt his heart drop. "What? I didn't do anything," he exclaimed, his voice rising in panic. "Please, Kayode, let them speak," Mr. Bayo said, trying to maintain calm. "What evidence do you have?" The second officer, a younger woman with a clipboard, stepped forward. "We found a fingerprint on a broken window at Chief Adeoye's mansion, and a witness claims to have seen you near the scene." Kayode shook his head vehemently. "That's impossible. I was at home all day. I didn't even go near that part of town." "Do you have anyone who can vouch for your whereabouts?" the woman asked, her pen poised over the clipboard. Kayode glanced at his father, who looked equally bewildered. "I was studying for my exams," Kayode said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I can call my friend Kola. He was with me." "Make the call," Mr. Bayo urged, his voice firm yet supportive. Kayode rushed to grab his phone, his hands trembling. He dialed Kola's number, praying he would pick up. After a few rings, Kola's voice came through, sounding groggy. "Kayode, what's up?" "Kola, I need your help. The police are here, and they think I'm involved in a robbery. Can you come over?" "What? I'll be right there," Kola replied, his tone shifting to alarm. As Kayode hung up, the officers exchanged glances. "We'll need to take you in for questioning, Kayode," the male officer said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "No, you can't do this," Kayode shouted, feeling the walls of his home closing in even tighter. "I'm innocent." "Calm down, Kayode," Mr. Bayo said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure this out. Just tell them what you know." The officers stepped inside, their presence filling the small living room. Kayode felt like a caged animal, trapped and helpless. The air was thick with tension, and he could hear the faint sound of a radio playing in the background, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in his life. Just then, Kola burst through the door, breathless. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes darting between Kayode and the officers. "Kayode is being accused of a crime he didn't commit," Mr. Bayo explained, his voice steady but strained. Kola turned to the officers, his expression fierce. "You can't just take him like this. He's a good person. We're just doing our job, the female officer replied. Her tone clipped. We have to follow the evidence. Kayode felt a surge of gratitude for Kola's support, but it was overshadowed by fear. Kola, please tell them I was with you, he pleaded. I will. I promise, Kola said, stepping closer to Kayode. Just stay strong, okay? As the officers prepared to take Kayode away, he looked at his father, whose face was a mask of worry. Dad, I didn't do anything wrong, he said, his voice breaking. I know, son. I believe you, Mr. Bayo replied, his eyes filled with determination. We will get to the bottom of this. With that, Kayode was led out of his home, the weight of uncertainty heavy on his shoulders. The whispers of the neighborhood began to swirl around him, and he could feel the eyes of his friends and neighbors watching, judging. The world he had known was slipping away, and all he could do was hold on to the hope that the truth would prevail. As Kayode sat in the small, dimly lit interrogation room, he replayed the events of that day in his mind. The flickering fluorescent light overhead cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the room feel even more claustrophobic. He could hear the distant hum of the air conditioning, a constant reminder of the sterile environment that felt so far removed from the chaos of the outside world. He knew he had to clear his name. But how? The evidence seemed damning. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door creaking open. A stern-looking officer stepped in, glancing at Kayode with a mixture of suspicion and indifference. You're still here? The officer asked, his voice flat. You should be cooperating, not sulking. Kayode clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out. I am cooperating. I just need time to think, he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The officer shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. Time won't change the facts. You were found at the scene, and the evidence is against you. As the officer left, Kayode felt a wave of despair wash over him. He couldn't let this be the end. Determined to prove his innocence, Kayode decided to investigate on his own. With the help of his younger sister, Funmi, who believed in him wholeheartedly, they began to piece together the puzzle. Funmi, Kayode called out as he stepped into their small apartment later that evening. The living room was cluttered with books and gadgets, a testament to Funmi's tech-savvy nature. She looked up from her laptop, her eyes bright with excitement. Kayode, I've been waiting for you, she exclaimed, her fingers flying over the keyboard. I managed to get my hands on some security footage from the area around Chief Adeoye's mansion. Kayode's heart raced. Really? That's amazing. Let's take a look. They gathered around the laptop, the screen illuminating their faces in the dim light. The grainy video flickered, showing a view of the street outside the mansion. Funmi fast-forwarded through the footage, her brow furrowed in concentration. Wait, go back, Kayode said suddenly, his pulse quickening. There, did you see that? Funmi rewound the video, and they both leaned closer. A shadowy figure loitered near Chief Adeoye's mansion, dressed in a hoodie that obscured their face. It was a fleeting glimpse, but it was enough to rekindle their determination. Who is that? Funmi whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Do you think they could be involved? I don't know, Kayode replied, his mind racing. But we need to find out. This could be the key to proving my innocence. Funmi nodded, her expression serious. We should try to enhance the footage. Maybe we can get a clearer image of their face. As they worked late into the night, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air was thick with tension, and the only sounds were the clicking of the keyboard and the occasional rustle of papers. Kayode could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but Funmi's unwavering belief in him kept him going. Do you remember when we used to play detective as kids? Funmi asked, breaking the silence. We'd solve mysteries in the backyard, pretending to be heroes. Coyote smiled faintly, the memory bringing a momentary lightness to his heart. Yeah, we were unstoppable back then. I wish it were that simple now. Funmi looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. We can be unstoppable again. We just need to stay focused and not give up. Hours turned into days, and just when they were about to lose hope, they spotted something strange in the footage. Coyote's heart raced as he pointed at the screen. Look, there's something in their hand. It looks like a phone. Funmi squinted at the screen, her excitement palpable. If we can trace that phone, it might lead us to the person behind this. Let's do it, Coyote said, his voice firm. We can't let this slip away. I won't let them take my life from me without a fight. As they continued to analyze the footage, the tension in the room grew thicker. The stakes were high, and every moment felt crucial. Coyote could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. But with Funmi by his side, he felt a flicker of hope. They were in this together, and together they would uncover the truth. Coyote and Funmi decided to stake out the area, hoping to catch a break. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every small sound seem amplified. The faint rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant bark of a dog, and the occasional hum of a passing car were the only interruptions to the stillness. They spent countless nights hidden in the shadows, watching and waiting. The air was often cold, biting at their skin, but they endured it, driven by determination. Coyote, are you sure this is the right place? Funmi whispered one night, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own breathing. She adjusted her scarf, pulling it tighter around her neck. Coyote nodded, his eyes fixed on the dimly lit street ahead. I'm sure. We just have to be patient. If we're right, they'll show up eventually. Funmi sighed, leaning back against the rough wall of the alley they were hiding in. I just hope this isn't another dead end. We've been at this for weeks. It'll pay off, Coyote said firmly, though there was a hint of weariness in his voice. We're close, Funmi. I can feel it. It was on one of these nights, after hours of waiting in the cold, that they noticed the same hooded figure lurking once again. The figure moved with a deliberate slowness, as if trying not to draw attention. Coyote nudged Funmi, pointing silently in the figure's direction. There he is, Funmi whispered, her heart beginning to race. Stay low, Coyote instructed, his voice calm but firm. We can't let him see us. They followed the figure, careful to stay out of sight. The streets were dimly lit, with only the occasional flickering street lamp casting pools of light on the cracked pavement. Shadows danced on the walls of the buildings, creating an almost eerie atmosphere. The figure moved swiftly, weaving through narrow alleys and side streets, as if he knew the area like the back of his hand. Do you think he knows we're following him? Funmi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't think so, Coyote replied, his eyes never leaving the figure. But we can't take any chances. Stay close. The trail led them to a rundown building on the outskirts of town. The building was a crumbling relic of what it once was, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. The faint smell of dampness and decay hung in the air, making Funmi wrinkle her nose in disgust. This place gives me the creeps, she muttered, glancing around nervously. Stay focused, Coyote said, his tone serious. We're not here to admire the scenery. They crept closer, careful not to make a sound. Through one of the broken windows, they could see faint light coming from inside. Shadows moved across the walls, and the muffled sound of voices reached their ears. "Do you hear that?" Funmi asked, her voice barely audible. Kayode nodded. "Let's get a closer look." Inside, they discovered a group of petty thieves led by a man named Toby, who had a reputation for being slippery and cunning. Toby was tall and lean, with sharp features and a calculating look in his eyes. He stood at the center of the room, giving orders to the others with an air of authority. "We need to be smart about this," Toby was saying, his voice low but commanding. "The last thing we need is to draw attention to ourselves." One of the thieves, a younger man with a nervous expression, spoke up. "But what if someone saw us? What if they're onto us?" Toby shot him a cold look. "Then we make sure they don't live to tell anyone. Understand?" The younger man nodded quickly, his face pale. Kayode and Funmi exchanged a glance, their expressions grim. They knew they had to act fast, but they couldn't afford to be reckless. "We need evidence," Kayode whispered. "Something solid that we can take to the authorities." Funmi nodded, pulling out her phone. "I'll record everything. You keep an eye on them." They spent the next hour gathering as much evidence as they could. Funmi recorded conversations, her hands trembling slightly as she held the phone. Kayode took pictures, his heart pounding in his chest. Every creak of the floorboards, every muffled sound from outside made them jump, but they pressed on, knowing they couldn't leave without irrefutable proof. At one point, Toby glanced toward the window, his eyes narrowing. Kayode and Funmi froze, their hearts racing. For a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. But then Toby turned away, muttering something under his breath, and the tension eased slightly. "That was too close," Funmi whispered, her voice shaking. "We're almost done," Kayode replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Just a little longer." By the time they were finished, they had enough evidence to link Toby and his gang to the robbery. As they slipped away into the night, their hearts were heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed, but there was also a sense of relief. They had done what they came to do. "Do you think this will be enough?" Funmi asked as they made their way back to their car. "It has to be," Kayode said, his voice firm. "We've done our part. Now it's up to the authorities to do theirs." Funmi nodded, though a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. But for now, all they could do was wait and hope that justice would be served. Armed with their findings, Kayode and Funmi made their way to the police station, their hearts pounding with a mix of hope and anxiety. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement as they approached the building. Kayode glanced at Funmi, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Do you think they'll believe us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Funmi shrugged, her eyes scanning the entrance. "They have to. We have the evidence. It's solid." As they stepped inside, the sterile smell of disinfectant hit them. The walls were painted a dull grey, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, creating an atmosphere that felt both oppressive and cold. A uniformed officer sat behind the front desk, his expression one of indifference as he glanced up from his paperwork. "Can I help you?" he asked, barely looking at them. Kayode took a deep breath, stepping forward. "We need to speak to someone about a case. It's urgent." The officer raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "What case?" "It's about Toby and his gang," Funmi interjected, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We have evidence that links them to the recent thefts in the neighborhood." The officer's expression shifted slightly, but skepticism still lingered in his eyes. "Evidence, huh? Everyone claims they have evidence. What makes you different?" Kayode felt a surge of frustration. "We have photographs, Witness statements. Everything you need to take this seriously. The officer sighed, pushing himself up from his chair. Fine. Wait here. He disappeared into the back, leaving Coyote and Funmi standing in the Stark lobby, the tension between them palpable. Do you think he'll actually bring someone? Coyote asked, running a hand through his hair. I hope so, Funmi replied, crossing her arms. We can't let this go, not after everything that's happened. Moments later, a detective emerged, his demeanor more serious than the officer's. He was tall, with a weary look in his eyes that suggested he had seen too much in his years on the force. What's this about Toby? He asked, his voice low and gravelly. Coyote stepped forward again, his heart racing. We have evidence that he's behind the thefts. We've been tracking him and his gang for weeks. The detective studied them for a moment, then motioned for them to follow him into a small conference room. The walls were lined with bulletin boards, covered in case files and photographs. A chaotic collage of crime and investigation. Sit, he instructed, gesturing to the chairs around a table cluttered with papers. Let's see what you've got. Coyote and Funmi exchanged a glance before pulling out their evidence. Funmi laid the photographs on the table, her hands trembling slightly as she did so. These were taken last week, she explained. We followed Toby and his gang to their hideout. You can see them loading stolen goods into a van. The detective leaned in, examining the photos closely. And you're sure this is Toby? Absolutely, Coyote replied, his voice firm. We've seen him around the neighborhood for years. He's the ringleader. The detective nodded slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to contemplation. This is good work, but we need more than just photos. We need a solid case to bring him in. What do you mean? Funmi asked, her voice rising slightly. We have everything right here. I understand your frustration, the detective said, raising a hand to calm her. But we need to conduct a raid. We can't just go in without backup. It's too risky. Coyote felt a knot tighten in his stomach. How long will that take? Depends on the situation, the detective replied, his tone measured. We'll need to gather a team, plan it out. It could take a few hours. Hours? Funmi echoed, her eyes wide. What if they move? What if they find out we're onto them? The detective met her gaze, his expression serious. That's a risk we have to take. We can't act impulsively. Coyote clenched his fists, frustration boiling over. We can't just sit here and wait. We have to do something now. Calm down, the detective said, his voice steady. I understand your urgency, but we need to be smart about this. We'll get them, but we have to do it right. After what felt like an eternity, the detective finally stood up. All right, I'll get the team together. You two stay here. We'll conduct a raid, and I'll keep you updated. As he left the room, Coyote and Funmi exchanged anxious glances. The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air, and the silence felt deafening. Do you think they'll catch him? Funmi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hope so, Coyote replied, his heart racing. For all our sakes. Time seemed to stretch as they waited, the tension in the room palpable. Finally, the detective returned, flanked by several officers. We're ready, he said, his voice steady. Let's go. The group moved quickly, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they made their way to the location Coyote and Funmi had identified. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel underfoot. As they approached the hideout, Coyote's heart raced. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it. The culmination of their efforts, the chance to bring Toby and his gang to justice. The detective signaled for the team to spread out, and Kayode and Funmi watched from a distance, their hearts pounding in their chests. The officers moved in, their movements precise and calculated. A few tense moments passed before the sound of shouting erupted from the hideout. Kayode's breath caught in his throat as he watched the officers storm inside. Then, moments later, Toby and his gang were apprehended, their faces twisted in shock and anger. The stolen items were recovered, and the truth finally came to light. Kayode felt a wave of relief wash over him as he watched the scene unfold. He turned to Funmi, who was smiling through her tears. "We did it," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes," Kayode replied, his heart swelling with pride. "We did." As the officers led Toby away in handcuffs, Kayode felt a sense of closure. He had been exonerated, his name cleared of any wrongdoing. The nightmare was finally over, and justice had been served. The community, once so quick to judge, now rallied around Kayode, praising his bravery and determination. Chief Adeoye personally apologized to him and his family, and Mr. Bayo's pride in his son knew no bounds.